And I don't know if inventing is quite right, but so definitely we talked about it. And by the way, it was never meant as an anti-pattern, and it's not. And I'm actually rewriting it with some colleagues in a book that'll come out soon for cloud architectures and stuff. And there's trade-offs on any architectural decisions, as you see. And so today I'm going to talk about software architecture revolution, whatever that means, right? And I'm talking a lot of times. I come more from the technical side, talking about some of the technical things you do. This is going to talk more from when you're leading it and organizational wise and some things like that. But I have a lot of references and pointers to some technical side too. And I have a lot of good war stories from doing this a few times. So if anybody is also interested from that perspective, talk to me afterwards with this. And I'm, I believe it or not, long before the LLMs and stuff, I was put this picture on here from the Matrix, because it's not like, from, like that's our revolution. We're just gonna have the Gen AI do all that stuff. That's not what I'm gonna talk about with that. By the way, I will just say this as I'm getting started. I am one of the co-authors on the Big Ball of Mud pattern from 25 years ago, and it's been mentioned, like Eric mentions it in his book, as a pattern, and some other stuff, and some of the trade-offs around that. I had fun recently with a little bit of Copilot and Gen AI, where I said, ooh, imagine you're Harry Potter or Yoda, because sometimes people call me Yoda because of my last name, or Meta Yoda is some of my social network names. It's like, how would you describe it? And it was very interesting and fun, and I even did some fun pictures. So it generated some thought and some creative thought, and I might try to do some fun things as I'm evolving some of those ideas. Sometimes this is related to, some people call it modernization, but it's not always modernization. For example, I've known some organizations, they had microservices, and they had to revolutionize by going back to monoliths, make dramatic changes. And we even heard Chris Richardson talk about that yesterday, when there's all these trade-offs and when you're making decisions. Though a lot of times you might say, oh, we need to go to the new platforms or the new types of frameworks, update our Java, or maybe we're going to a new language or a new database technology. And this is also based upon a collaboration with my good friend Martin. And we've been writing a lot of patterns on this, and I'll have some pointers to a lot of things you can look at based. And he was this CTO of PagSeguro, now PagBank, which is equivalent of PayPal and Square in Brazil. I was doing a lot with them before the pandemic, where we went through a revolution and some others. So it's based on some real experiences. So to motivate this topic, I'll use an analogy to architecture, building architecture. So consider, for example, the evolution of the architecture of a building. During the lifespan of any building, such as this house, this was a house built in 1902 in Newburyport, Massachusetts, and it was designed well for the original needs of the occupants back in 1902. Back then, electricity was pretty new, right? And they had different plumbing requirements. There was usually larger families, at least in the U.S. at that time. A lot of times there might be 8, 10 children or whatever. The kitchen requirements were quite different, because a lot of times it's like a lot of irregular type meals that they did. So, but over time, this house has had various updates. This house is still being lived in today, over 100 years later. And so obviously they had to evolve the architecture in certain parts of this house to meet the evolving requirements. For example, they had to meet the new plumbing and electrical requirements. Having internet access has become very important nowadays, so they had to do things like that. And plus, also, they're smaller families generally. People wanted more bigger rooms, open space, so they had to, there was changes inside the house for that. Now, some people want more gourmet type food options. There are many options on the kitchen, so the kitchen had to kind of adapt for a lot of this. And even the bathrooms, well, we want showers, right? And not only showers, maybe you want a workout area and hot tubs and all these other things. And so as you're going through some of these with the house, some of these changes are so radical. So some changes are pretty straightforward. You can make some changes. Maybe we're going to have a wider staircase, and the family's still kind of living in it as you're making some of these adjustments to it. But some of these changes can cause a little bit more upheaval to the actual architecture of the house, and so the occupants, the people using the house, the users of the system, right? And some of these can become very traumatic, right? Where you might even have to shut down big parts of the house as you had. So this is sometimes you might have to stop other things, maybe not everything, to focus on some major changes or shut off parts of the thing. So sometimes these are more radical changes can cause a lot of upheaval and require major change to the original design. Hey, sometimes this happens to software too, right? So especially any software that I've seen that lives more than 10 years, even sometimes more than 5 years, but definitely if it's living 10 or 20 years, will experience this. And I was involved in the mid-2000s with a small to medium Silicon Valley company that had got bought out by Iron Mountain, and they went through this where they had, it was kind of the hype of 4GLs. In the early 90s, they built a system on 4GLs, and that's going to make programmers go away or designers, just like Gen AI today, right? Which is not the case, right? But as things had changed by the mid-2000s, they definitely needed to change their architecture. Their business was changing. And in fact, some of the contracts they had with some of their future customers required that for future business this had to be done. And so we came in and we had to definitely, I guess if you want to say modernize, but we definitely had to radically change the software architecture. At that time, it was .NET, service-oriented architecture, all those other types of things. And we even applied a lot of the supervisor type patterns that you might have heard if you've heard the keynote. That was all part of our architecture as well for all that. But more recently, and so what I want to kind of relate to as well, in the mid-2010, about 2015 or so, I started working at this company here in Brazil for doing this. And originally they evolved from just an online kind of email and message type and sharing information in the early 2000s, but then they became like an online payment system similar to PayPal. But then it was really dedicated to the Brazilian market. From there, they evolved from online payments to in-store payments, originally done by something connected to your cell phone. But ultimately, this was replaced with the terminal type thing that they evolved. And the cool thing about it is a lot of people that had trouble even getting credit cards or bank accounts as the small persons in there, now all of a sudden they were empowered to be able to do business and be able to even handle some of those transactions. So they really were empowering some of the especially the low income people that couldn't do this. It could still go out and start selling things on the street and things like that. And so the original channel for interacting with the customer was primarily through the web. However, they became mobile first and even through their payment terminals as well. Ultimately, they went from payments and banking and like PayPal and Square equivalent to banking as well. So obviously, there was a lot of changes. And the original architecture was a monolith, but it's a very successful monolith. It helped them grow to this point. But by the time they brought me in, well, I am known for balls of mud, right? But they were having an entangled system. That's why they called me in. And plus, also, I'm with the group that coined the term refactoring. Before, we worked with Martin Fowler. He wrote the book, but we did the first work and the first commercial tools, and actually did the original work with that. And so it's like, oh, can you come in and help us make our architecture more adaptable? Because we have kind of a mess, and we're having success, but now we're having more trouble to sustain and adapt and change to these new requirements. And so I came in, and of course, part of it is, well, I can help refactor and clean up your code, but you have to also change the practices or the organization and the mindset. And so, a lot of that started happening. And we had some successful things. I helped remove 10,000 dead methods of Java code and stuff like that very carefully, right? But ultimately, even the architecture, they had 20-some teams at that time and having a lot of success, but growing rapidly with the different types of things and features that were going on in the system. And so ultimately, they had to really think about doing, evolving the architecture. Now, I'm claimed to be an agilist. I was involved even before. I was doing extreme programming in the late 90s and stuff like that, and part of the patterns community where a lot of the agile mindset things evolved from. And so you might say, hey, Joe, can't you just do kind of the normal, gradual, agile architecture kind of evolving of this? And possibly. And in fact, I've written a lot of patterns about it, with Rebecca Wurzbach and other people, some of you may know, and she's probably been here at this conference talking about this topic, but about being agile, about architecture. And in fact, if you want to see a talk on that, that's one from Agile Brazil last year, anybody that wants access to this. And by the way, if anybody wants any of my materials, just contact me through any social network, and I'll openly share. I'll give you a PDF. I might put some of them online as well, too. So idealistically, the architecture can evolve with changes, with the requirements, functional and non-functional, and we can make some steps. And there's some good practices, agile architecture patterns that can help. However, products that survive for a decade or more can become fossilized in the architecture. Well, now that's mandating the types of changes that you can make. And sometimes you need to make a more radical change. And by the way, that still fits into the agile mindset. There's nothing that says we always have to do just the small Kaizen type steps. Sometimes we can do the Kaikaku type, the more radical major type changes with that. And so when you have these radical shifts, you're moving more towards what word coining as a term is architectural revolution, more radical type changes. But you still need to be agile and lean, but agile and lean isn't just blindly following a set of practices and just always doing these little things. Sometimes you can make radical major changes as you're doing it as well. So there's many kind of revolutions, right? That obviously there's a very drastic and things that cause some upheaval and problem. But there's been things that, like the Industrial Revolution or the Digital Revolution. Wait, is there a Gen AI revolution going on now? I don't know. We'll know more probably 5 years from now. But the Oxford Dictionary definition of revolution talks about a great transformation, a perceptible change of any kind, whether progressively, continuously, or suddenly. So it could be you're making a change, but maybe you're scheduling it out over time. And so we're using the term revolution to imply the architecture work will be performed and managed as a dedicated initiative, rather than just a task being added to the backlog, and slowly over time, maybe the architecture will evolve to the new set of platforms or frameworks or the new types of databases that you want to use, for example. So things can happen progressively. It doesn't necessarily mean the system will be rewritten from scratch, though sometimes that happens and parts of it will happen. That's an option, especially for smaller pieces or smaller applications. And we have some patterns talking about whether you freeze or you're changing the tires of a moving car, as you're going along, as trade-offs with this. So why call it a revolution? Well, first of all, part of it is we're making a major change. It's not just one of the simpler changes. And then also, too, if you're going to make a big radical change, it's not like if we can just have a couple engineering teams go off and do this, go do it. Fine. We'll let that kind of work itself out. But sometimes this involves so many different systems, especially larger systems as we're growing. And so you need a commitment, not just the technology teams or IT. You need the involvement of the entire organization. And it's also it's dedicated. It's not just a little bit of space in the backlogs. You might have some focus teams kind of doing some different things, and helping other teams as we transition to this new architecture. But still, you're going to be more successful. You know, you don't want to try to do a big bang approach. Let's spend 6 months or a year rewriting and try to catch up. There's a lot of problems with that. So it's usually not a rewrite, but it can be piecemeal, and you might be rewriting. I've done rewrites as part of some of that as well. And you have a better chance of success if you have active leadership with influence within the organization, because you need to get commitment and resources to make this happen. And so I'm going to present this with a set of patterns, because I'm kind of a pattern guy. There I am with Martin in Brazil when we were working on some a couple years ago. Actually, Martin, who was the CTO, he decided a couple years ago, okay, I've done CTO for a long time now. I want to do something new. And then he got a hold of me after he left, and he's like, Joe, we should write this up as some patterns. And okay, that's cool. And so what we do is we're writing a pattern. So I at least want to tell you briefly what my thoughts of patterns are, what my bias is. I come from the community, and we used to, sometimes some of us in the patterns community would say, ooh, a pattern is like the best solution or the best proven best practices. But it's not necessarily best. They're just proven practices. Because if I say best, you'll say prove it. and so there might be something that might be a little bit better, and it becomes kind of a regular, mostly it's a repeated practice that they're proven solution to recurring problems. And they incorporate experiences that have been successfully applied in many contexts. And so us engineers, we always like to solve problems. So a lot of times those of us, especially when I evolved with the Gang of Four, I was working with Ralph Johnson at the time in the early 90s from the Software Architecture and Patterns Group. And as engineers, we always look at, from software, we're solving problems. But sometimes you have designers that are designing new things or creating new collaborative, creative teams. So you can think of it as proven practices in repeating situations is another way that you can look at this as well. And by the way, if you want to know a lot more about patterns, go to the Hillside group, the hillside.net/plop, and I put a QR code on there for this. And we're going to have our plop conference, Indu, who's also on the board. I'm on this educational not-for-profit where we promote these conferences, and she's helping organize the next one in the Columbia Gorge up just north of Portland. So check it out. So I'm going to go through a pattern language, and pattern languages for helping leaders of this architectural revolution succeed in the initiative. And a language is really a set of related patterns. It's not like you do one thing and, we have great success. I mean, even when I look at like Chris Richardson's microservices patterns, he has a lot of patterns and there's always trade-offs. One thing I really liked is you start off, monolith versus microservices. Monolith is not a bad thing. Sometimes it's the right thing. And so then if you choose microservices, well, do I do event-driven or not? Or and there's some patterns to help. Do I have CQRS? There's all these other types of patterns with that. And so a language helps you guide you through as you're going through this. So I'm going to talk from the leadership perspective, and since we're talking about leading a software architecture revolution, I at least want to tell you how I think about leaders. So I always look at leaders aren't necessarily the role, just because, I'm the CTO or I'm the CEO. Am I really a leader? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe I'm the manager that's stuck, but the leaders are some team, could be some team or some group inside that knowing what's going on. So leaders are noticed, but not necessarily named, right? The best leaders I've seen, even if they hold a role, it's not like they're doing it, they're leading by example. And I'm noticing and kind of, I want to follow what's going on. So it's not necessarily the boss or CEO or a director or an architect, even though it could be. It could be a team, it could be a few engineers that really notice things, or other parts of the organization. So leaders do not necessarily equal boss. A boss is not necessarily a leader. So I've written over 30 patterns that I've published with Martin. Now, I'm not going to try to show all these to you today. That would be impossible. But I will give you an overview of the pattern languages, and I'm going to go through in a little bit of detail at least about creating awareness and preparing and measuring as you're going through an architecture revolution. There's also some for prioritizing once you get into doing it, how to prioritize activities, some strategic and tactical, as well as we have Conway's Law and the inverse of Conway's Law, how we do our organization. And in fact, some of you might say, Joe, why are you here explore DDD talking about the leadership side? Well, believe me, thinking about how you model the domain and how you're thinking about that definitely influences, especially the organization and prioritization when we get to that, plus the technical side with what's going on with that. So are we ready? Let's go. So since I have a limited amount of time, I'll try not to go too fast, but I'm going to move at a pretty good speed just to get you through some of these patterns, and then I'll bring you back to wrap it up, okay? Okay, so let's go. Well, one thing, we need to start with some form of awakening. It's almost like, some first step. We got to admit there's a problem out there, right? If we don't admit that there's any kind of problem, we're not going to make things better. So before any architectural revolution can happen, the organization must become aware of the problems, and they must admit that there's something going on. You might think it's some other kind. Maybe we just need better, the business people say, just hire better developers or better tech people, or just bring in some consultants and, it'll go away. But really, we need to kind of waken up, and sometimes this happens with a team. It could happen with an individual. Notice that, wow, these releases are getting harder, and look at the growth of what's happening. If we don't do something now, and maybe we're an online payment system during Black Friday, it's going to be a nightmare. By the way, Brazil has Black Friday too, even though they don't do Thanksgiving, though I had Thanksgiving turkey when I was down there. But Black Friday, they do the whole business side, and it was all hands on deck with this system during Black Friday. So sometimes it's like, wow, solve all the problems we had. Are we going to be able to handle it, this next big thing? And look at what's happening with our Oracle databases and how much we're having to spend to try to keep up with this. So you have to have some kind of awakening. And maybe you think, maybe we can just experiment and try some of these things, but you're seeing that that's not happening. And after some kind of feedback and some exploratory type checks of the architecture, maybe some spike solution checks, you realize, we need to make a radical change to our architecture. So once we become aware of the problem, then we start taking a closer look at the architecture. So then, we have a problem. What do we do? Stay quiet? If I open up the squeaky wheel, But sometimes we have to raise awareness. So we have to let people know. And so we have to scare the soul out of them. Right? or use whatever you want with that. But and you could even think of this as a form of a wake-up call from Fearless Change, except this is really radical at this point. And one thing is you could relate it to things they know. So, for example, with Pax the Guru, we had some good war stories. Like we even had a lot of data that we were able to relate to. And when the opportunity arises at some meeting, or maybe you call one, point out these negative events. Remember when during Black Friday and we had those downtimes and we lost those 2 million reais? And that's their currency is for dollars in Brazil. And it was like, wow, and how we had to come in and we were frantically, and it had a kind of a bad PR. We were in the news about all this. And also, look at our storage use, and this is how much it's going to cost if we try to extend it with Oracle and go in with all these other things. And so you need you relate it, you do a personal touch and relate it to things that they can relate to when you do that. But you got to watch out for a couple anti-patterns when you do this. Crying wolf. You're just the one, you're the trouble. There's not a problem. Everything's okay. So if you're just squeaking all the time, so if you apply it too frequently or use it in situations that don't warrant the impact, your peers may believe that you're just crying wolf. There's Joe again making all this noise, right? So it might harm your ability to do the revolution. So you should make compelling arguments when scaring. And if it's too weak or unclear, you'll get that. And also, you might be shoot the messenger. Oh, let's move him over to this other team, or let's fire him. And by the way, if the things are really bad, I might need to put myself out there that I don't want to work for this organization anymore. So, but that's something to think about as you're applying this pattern. So one way to mitigate those anti-patterns is to have some hope when you're presenting the problem, when you're scaring the soul out of them, is have some kind of plan up your sleeve. So offer some hope. Have some kind of rough adaptive plan. It's not like you have all the details yet. So maybe you've already gone out and worked with some teams and done a little bit of research, so you're able to come back. But look, if we do this and we apply this, I know it's going to have a little bit of effect here on the next 6 months, but look where it's going to put us next year. And so don't scare them without a plan. Have some kind of plan, and that way, when you talk about it, you're able to offer some hope. And then you can start getting the right people together to kind of evolve the plan. It's not the end-all, be-all plan. I even think of architectural roadmap is one of the patterns that I wrote, and the other ones, that's like a rough adaptive plan that might have some decision makings, but it's like, look, we do have a strategy on how we might be able to get to this better place. So it might need things like the estimated of teams and budgets, initial steps, maybe some final objectives, and how we will get there. And it might include some of the architectural vision. Now, to be really successful, we need to get everybody working together, and we're all in agreement. So that's where there's a pattern where we call all in the. So it's good to start with trying to get people all in the same boat. People to really understand the issue. And you're using some of the awakening and scaring to help with that. And it can help with the plan. They can help evolve your plan. So maybe you start with a few people that your respected colleagues that understand and empathize. So maybe you're able to convince them, and they kind of, they're in agreement. So then you're kind of building it. And ultimately, you might have to motivate them with still some of the personal stories as you go through that. By the way, some of you might notice, it looks like you just kind of, these patterns, I'm showing pattern relations because patterns usually have relations. It's not necessarily you flow through every company or every organization, or even if I'm building software, applying the design patterns, we'll have a different way of applying the patterns. But so this is telling a scenario and a good way of kind of understanding the patterns. So if the business side, if they really don't understand what's going on, the architectural revolution probably will not happen, or it will not succeed. Also, tech people need to understand the business needs as we're moving through this revolution, because we don't want to bankrupt the business as we're going as well. So we have to assure business leaders in IT to function as part of their organizational structure and work very closely to understand each other. So we want to identify the most collaborative, influential people there, and show them how we can work and involve people as part of the prioritization and team dynamics. And make sure also that the tech people are part of the business discussions and understand the business priorities and things that may need to be done. Are there some things that we can hold off on, or maybe we have a way of kind of releasing a little bit in the old, but maybe we try to release some in the new architecture as we're moving forward. So now that we've awakened the organization and started working on a plan, you also need to keep people aware of the progress and aware of the problem. So this continuous awareness building is a very important thing to consider as well as you're going through this. And this will help people all in the same boat and support that as you're going through that. So you don't want people to lose focus. You want people to really stay aware. So you want to kind of discuss the architectural issues and have some different ways of sharing what's going on and making things visible. That's key. You can't kind of evolve and get things better if we can't fix what we can't see. And so it's really important. So maybe you create artifacts that display what's happening. Maybe they're physical artifacts. Maybe they're digital. And the leaders might take opportunity to speak with their peers, whether it's IT leaders or the business thing. And you want to kind of avoid technical jargon. We want to look at accessible language, more of the domain language. That's where some of the DDD concepts can come in, or domain modeling concepts with that. And make teams aware. And in fact, even the CTO should discuss the architectural impact with all the different people, but even higher up, that should be done. So this is a way of making things visible. This was with another organization that I worked with, New Bank Online Digital, where they had a big architecture. And in fact, this was so important that we wrote it up. I wrote it up with Sutherland, Copeland, and a lot of us other. We wrote these Scrum patterns to get the best out of Scrum a few years ago. But it's information radiator kind of things. Alistair Coburg sometimes talks about that as well. So create artifacts that add values for the team, project, and business that relates to the architectural revolution. Make them visible. Analyze what adds value and what helps with the awareness. And there's some different ways to do that. There's not like a silver bullet, because it depends upon your teams and how you're going. Okay. And now, just for another pattern for the creating awareness before we move on to the how to prepare and how to measure this, so that's what I focused on mostly right now. So now I want to move into the second set of patterns, which focus on now we've got commitment, now and we've got buy-in, and we're going to move forward. Maybe we were already trying to do some little things with some teams, had decided they needed to experiment with that anyway, but now we have commitment. So if we have a plan, we should also build the infrastructure or pave the road towards the new architecture that makes it easier for people to do this. And so as you're paving the road, which also can help with the engagement of awareness building, so teams will have a reluctance to use the new architecture, especially if you're a large organization with a lot of teams. Using the old architecture, they're comfortable with doing it. Unless you make an easier way, like if we're going from monolith to microservices, if you don't provide some easy ways for them, the developing teams, to know how to use that, and maybe you have to have training, build the infrastructure. You might have to provide templates with maybe here's kind of the default set of a way a microservice should be with the testing, and here's the pipeline, and then they can very quickly kind of clone that and then start building their microservices. Maybe you have some testing and experimenting environments already there. You've provided the DevOps maybe, or automating the different types of things that you want to do. And you really want to make it easier for teams to follow the new architecture rather than reinventing the wheel trying to figure out the new architecture, because then they'll be more encouraged to use it. And you might even provide support people from the architecture platform team that goes and does that. That's another pattern that we've kind of seen when we're looking at organization. Now, if you have a plan, and even if it's a rough adaptive plan, you should also include goals or targets. And so it's real important to have your company-wide targets to make sure that we're going through that. And so you really want to make it clear that the revolution is a strategic priority for the organization in this initiative, and there's buy-in, and that way you get the support, and people are on board. They're all in the same boat. So they need to clearly signal that the revolution is important. So a lot of times companies have very few of these high-level goals, but you really have to be persuasive and use the visibility of the revolution to raise awareness. And if the organization makes this a major priority, like this one company I did, Paxaguru, this was, for a whole year, this was an important priority throughout the whole company, because they knew they needed it. Now, they still had to continue doing business as they were going. And in fact, they even used, which I'm not sure if I agree with so much, but they even linked financial bonuses to the goals. But you got to watch what you measure, and you also have to be careful what you link financial things to, because you'll get it, but you may not get what you want. but you know, if you say, "Ooh, I need 100% coverage for you to get your bonus and check your code in," I was with an organization that had coverage as that. Developers are good at giving you coverage. In Java, I can use reflection and give you 100% coverage very easily, right? So it's really, you got to think about how you're doing some of this. So once you have these targets, you've got a plan, you're paving the road. It's important, once again, you can't fix what you can't see. That's also a pattern that I've written up before with Rebecca Wurzbrock and others on these agile architecture with this. So it's important to have ways to have the feedback. You need metrics for baseline and comparison. And so you need to track your progress as you're going through this. And which that once again, the people in the same boat, everybody part of the organization will help, and this will help encourage and also help with some of the awareness as you're going. It'll support that awareness as you're going through this. And then also paving the road will kind of help define that as well as you're going through that. So you need to track progress. We're making this big architectural revolution. Maybe it's a modernization, maybe not, because maybe you're just changing to a new set of platforms that you're developing as well. But you need to be clear about where and how the current system is impacting the business and whether the new architecture is making progress towards improving the situation. So it's good to have a set of metrics to evaluate the legacy or the previous application and compare with the new architecture, and using these metrics to measure your revolution progress as you're going through this. So you want to choose metrics that have value, that ties into the concerns with the stakeholders, and you want to have some indicators. I'm not promoting any, there's many metrics to consider. I'm not promoting these specifically, but here are some that you might find valuable, such as, your availability and response time, your application performance index, for example, or the DORA metrics, those might be some. Source code, maybe you're looking at some static or dynamic analysis, or the MTTR. There's all these different types of metrics that you can consider. But once again, we're making this revolution. These metrics should add value. And if we're using what I call the agile mindset, we're adapting these as we go, not blindly, but we're looking and inspecting and figuring out this metric was useful a month ago, but today we need to look at something different. Okay? Now we need to also make sure people understand our progress, so we need to make it tangible, especially if we're making a large jump with this. And so that's where we have one of our patterns is make progress tangible. Let's make it so people really understand what's going on with this, and which helps keep people together because they're seeing the progress. So it keeps the whole organization, people on the business side as well as the tech side, kind of working together as we go through this. And it also can help and explain your targets as you go through. So it's important. The challenge is, how do we keep the organization informed and keep people committed? So we want to create some kind of way to communicate the progress of what's going on. So we want to define different channels of communication. Maybe we have the company's environment, whether it's physical or virtual, to keep information available. There might be different types of media, graphics and video, or use the appropriate. Sometimes you just use Lego blocks. That's what they did here. Here we were strangling the monolith as they were going away. This is at Paxaguru when we went through this large revolution, going from the monolith that was very successful but was starting to hold them back to all of a sudden they saw the need for the microservices architecture style. And as we were strangling the monolith, which I've also written patterns about that talk technically what you can do, this is talking more leadership side rather than the technical side. So they would like, they got teams together. They say, okay, here's a monolith, but we need to pull off these different types of, part of that was checkout was very important as far as when you're purchasing something online, and checkout with authorization. We're paying a lot for authorization. We need to replace that with our own authorization where we can save a few percentage points. And ultimately they go through and they could build some excitement. So even something physical, artifacts like Lego blocks, the big Lego blocks was kind of a cool thing that they did there too, which I thought that was really awesome. Finally, my last pattern with this, and then I'll bring it back together, it is better if we can treat the revolution, as an agile portfolio with this. And so the architectural revolution as an agile portfolio will help with that, which can help to make the progress tangible, by the way. And it could also help with defining the targets. So it's really important to track progress of the revolution across multiple teams and show that this is committed and also respond that there might be roadblocks going on. So if we treat the architectural revolution like an agile portfolio, we might even need a portfolio manager and give them access to all teams to support the multi-team communication. And so agile portfolio management deals with how an organization identifies or prioritizes, organizes, and manages these different products. And if we make this architectural revolution as part of this, it's a mature process, and it values autonomy and adaptation. So, but we're making this high level. The architectural revolution is part of this portfolio management that we want to go through when we do this. So, what you've seen here is a couple of categories of the patterns about creating awareness and preparing and measuring. So I showed you the beginning of a pattern language. And a pattern language always has lots of relationships. This was about the creating awareness, preparing and measuring. But as I pointed out, this is the starting point. As you're going through the revolution, you still need to think about, now we're getting into the cadence. We're starting to move from the old architecture to the new. There might be some strategic type planning and prioritizing we need to do, as well as some tactical. So we've written up a lot of patterns on that. And then also, there is an organizational side, right? Because we have Conway's Law going on. It could be your organization was structured well for the old architecture. And this is, by the way, this is where domain modeling techniques, which have been around long before DDD. We were thinking about this in the 90s, and Eric did a great job of bringing it about. And one thing I'll attribute microservices for is it brought back a resurgence with thinking about domain modeling, especially with some of the subset of DDD techniques is useful. But as we're going through this, and that's why I think it's very relevant for what we're talking about. So DDD and domain modeling can help as you're getting in and as you're doing this, and especially with the organizational side. We're still finalizing and writing up some of the organizational patterns, so we have written up all of the prioritizing activities. We're going to put these into a catalog or a book online. But if you want to see a lot of these patterns and you want to get an overview of the pattern language, as well as all the details of the patterns that I presented here, just go to that QR code here. This is one of the, it's published off the PLOP website, the pattern languages, which, by the way, Indu's going to help with. She's helping lead the organization for our next one. Sorry to point you out there, Indu, but I'm excited that Indu's there. So let me just bring back the story and just tie it together, because we're near the end of the time with that. So as I talked about, Paxaguru hired me in 2015. This is another revolution, my second revolution that I've been involved with from the earlier one I told you about. And they were having a lot of success. And in fact, they had something they even wrote up more than 10 years ago. They called it kind of like this, I believe it was like the mega framework, scaling Scrum step by step. And where they took all their teams, because they had, 20-some teams. Oh, let's split them by 4. This week, this 1/4 of the teams can release. The next week, this. And so they were still having releases every week, but for your development, you could only release once a month. They were having good success with it, with the monolith, but then they went, during the time I was there, they grew by more than 10 times. They had hundreds of teams, and all the different things, and they were more than quadrupling the revenue every year. A good problem to have, double to quadrupling, somewhere in there. And now I think they have close to more than 1,000 teams. But as they were going through, imagine trying to do that with a monolith, with those types of changes. And so even though this was successful, it was holding them back. And as they evolved through this revolution, they went for, before a few years after, when we went through the revolution, this is around 2018 or 19, and they did their IPO and becoming a bank, they were able to release literally hundreds of different little changes every day into production, which was impossible before. That sounds a lot more agile and lean. And in fact, our architectural decisions really influence how agile a team can be. We need to think carefully about the types of things that we are doing with this. So this definitely made Martin, and this is Juan. Juan was a business person, and Martin was a CTO. And so Juan, he was committed. He understood, and we were building bridges between the business people and the other things as we went through. So just to kind of put the final points and wrap this together, first of all, if any of you have good stories, by the way, when I go back and I show this, there's many organizations done this, not just PaxiGuru. Uber, Netflix, Twitter X or whatever. Well, before X, Twitter. eBay. I'm not sure what Twitter's doing now, or X. Amazon. This is not unique. Software architecture is difficult to change, and if anything that lives for a while, we have to think about this, and a dedicated initiative can help. And sometimes you need to make radical changes, and that's still okay. That still fits into the agile mindset or whatever we think with this, and it's good to experiment and try different things. And so I presented some patterns helping with this. And by the way, modeling around the domain is very, very important, and that was something that we brought in as well. By the way, there's a link to the paper again on the first one, in case you didn't get that. And here's two quotes. One is from the Big Ball of Mud paper 25 years ago, which, if you look it up, if you think good architecture is expensive, try bad architecture. It's a lot harder and more expensive in the long run. Sometimes, though, the Big Ball of Mud, sometimes you do short exploratory, and you'll have a little bit of mess. It's just like a chef cooking, but you don't want your kitchen out of control. And then also, you can't fix what you can't see. Visibility is key. You heard me say that a couple times. I'm always open for good stories. If you have some architectural revolutions and want to talk, and when we put this together, we're going to try to get other stories. And definitely feel free to reach out to me, or if you want any of this material as well. So thank you very much, and thanks for the great organization of Explore DD and the committee. I mean, what a great conference, and for such a small staff to do all the things. So thank you very much.